The silence of a Toronto winter is heavy, but the voice on the phone was heavier. My sister called. Mom died last night. The funeral is Friday. She left everything to me. You get nothing. I just smiled. Mom was sipping tea right next to me. The trap was set. I watched the steam rise from Mom's cup, swirling in the cold morning light. Kara didn't wait for a response before hanging up. She thought she had just fired the final shot, but she had actually just handed me the ammunition. To most people, I am just Lily Harrison, a retiree with too much time. But my mind doesn't work like most people's. I am a forensic architect. My career was built on looking at solid structures, skyscrapers, bridges, tunnels, and finding the hidden cracks everyone else missed. I was the one they called when a building collapsed to find out exactly which bolt failed first. Right now, Kara's story was a wall of crumbling brick. In my world, sudden collapses don't happen without warning signs. I looked at the blueprints on my table. Mom sat across from me, her hands trembling slightly as she held the porcelain mug. She looked frail, her white hair thin and wispy, but her eyes were sharp. 2 days ago, she was locked in a high-end facility, drugged into compliance. Now, she was safe in my kitchen, wearing one of my oversized sweaters. The trauma of her escape still clung to her like a second skin. But the fog of the sedatives was lifting. She tapped a rhythmic pattern on the table. It was a nervous habit. Was that her? Mom whispered. I nodded, putting my phone down on the granite countertop. Kara had played her hand aggressively. She wanted the estate and the money. And she needed Mom out of the equation to get it. Declaring a living person dead was bold, even for her. It reeked of desperation. A structural engineer knows that when a load-bearing wall is removed, the whole house groans before it falls. Kara was ignoring the groan. She was just swinging the sledgehammer. I didn't feel anger. Anger is messy and unproductive. I felt the cold, precise focus of an audit beginning. I picked up my pen and made a note on the margin of my blueprint. Kara expected me to scream, to cry, to panic. That is what a normal sister does. But I wasn't a normal sister. I was an inspector. I needed to let her build this lie higher. The taller the tower, the more spectacular the crash would be. What do we do, Lily? Mom asked, looking at the untouched toast on her plate. I reached out and covered her hand with mine. Her skin was paper, thin, but her grip was surprisingly strong. We weren't going to hide. We were going to let Kara prepare her stage for Friday. I looked at the phone, then back at my mother. She thinks the structure is empty, I said, my voice steady. Let's show her what happens when you ignore the load-bearing walls. My kitchen was warm, but the memory of the willows was freezing. Last night, I stood in the delivery bay of that high-end facility. I hadn't gone through the front door. Architects know that service elevators are the arteries of any building, usually clogging with neglect. I followed a laundry cart up to the 4th floor. The air smelled of industrial lemon cleaner and stale urine. It was the scent of expensive abandonment. I found room 402 unlocked. Mom was slumped in a chair by the window. She was a silhouette against the gray winter sky. Mom, I whispered. She didn't move at first. I checked the bedside table. A cup of chamomile tea sat cold, next to a small plastic cup of pills. Vitamins. The nurse had told me over the phone. But I know what sedatives look like. I scooped the pills into my pocket. Mom's eyes were glassy, staring at nothing. The structure was failing. We walked out through the fire exit. The alarm didn't sound. I had disabled the sensor with a magnet minutes earlier. It was a simple bypass. A trick from my site inspection days. Now, back in the safety of my kitchen, the reality of the crime sat on the table between us. I pulled up the email on my tablet. It was an attachment from Kara. Death certificate. PDF. Stared back at me. The pixelated seal looked official enough. I zoomed in on the signature. Dr. Elias Ares. He was the facility director. The cause of death was listed as acute cardiac arrest at 4 a.m. It was a clean, sterile lie. I looked at Mom, who was buttering a piece of toast. She wasn't a ghost, but legally, she no longer existed. Kara had erased her with a PDF editor and a bribe. He made me drink the tea, Mom said suddenly. Her voice was stronger now. I looked up. Who, Mom? She stopped buttering the toast. The doctor, and a man in a gray suit. Kara called him Mr. Henderson. She took a shaky breath. They brought papers. Kara held my hand. She said it was just for my protection. She guided my pen, Lily. I couldn't stop shaking. I think I signed the deed to the lake house. My stomach tightened. The lake house was the crown jewel. It was worth millions. It wasn't just the lake house, I said, scrolling through the public records on my other screen. A pending transfer notice had already been filed. She had you sign a power of attorney and a blank deed transfer. It was a total demolition job. Kara wasn't just skimming off the top. She was stripping the copper wiring from the walls. She needed liquid assets fast. But why the rush? Why kill a golden goose unless you are starving? Mom reached into her pocket and pulled out a crumpled napkin. I was sleepy, Lily. But I wasn't dead. She smoothed the paper on the counter. When Kara left the room to call the funeral home, she left her phone unlocked on the bed. I saw the bank app open. I saw the red numbers. Mom pushed the napkin toward me. It contained a 6-digit passcode. She thinks I am senile. But I still know how to memorize a combination. Wednesday afternoon transformed my kitchen into a war room. I needed a specialist. Someone who could dig through digital bedrock. I dialed Marcus, a forensic accountant I had worked with on insurance fraud cases. I put the phone on speaker next to Mom's half-finished crossword puzzle. This better be about a collapsing bridge. Lily. He answered on the second ring. His voice was gravel and static. It is a collapsing family. I corrected him. I need a full financial autopsy on Harrison Heights Realty. Marcus didn't ask questions. That is why I pay him. He just asked for parameters. Look for debt to equity ratios that don't make sense, I said, pacing the cold tile floor. Check for offshore transfers and high-risk bridge loans. My sister is desperate. Mom watched me, her eyes wide. She had never seen this side of me. The site manager barking orders at contractors. To her, I was just the quiet daughter who liked math. Today, I was the foreman. The hours stretched like taffy. I poured more tea, but neither of us drank it. I sketched out a timeline on a yellow legal pad. Tuesday death faked. Wednesday funeral prep. Friday, the grand finale. Every architectural failure has a timeline of stress fractures. Kara was moving too fast. Speed creates vibration, and vibration cracks concrete. I needed to know exactly how much weight she was carrying before I started swinging the wrecking ball. The phone finally buzzed. You are going to want to sit down, Marcus said. The static was gone, replaced by the hum of his server cooling fans. Your sister isn't just underwater, Lily. She is crushed at the bottom of the Mariana Trench. I put a hand on the counter to steady myself. Mom leaned in, her ear close to the speaker. Give me the numbers, Marcus. He sighed. She took out a massive bridge loan for that waterfront development. The permits were denied yesterday. The puzzle pieces snapped into place with a sickening click. The development was stalled, but the loan was due. How much? I asked. 4 million, Marcus replied. And it is due next Monday. If she doesn't pay, she faces federal bank fraud charges for inflating her assets. It wasn't just greed driving my sister. It was terror. She needed Mom's estate not to get rich, but to stay out of prison. She was drowning, and she was using Mom as a raft. There is more, Marcus added, his voice dropping an octave. I checked the MLS listings. She didn't wait for probate. She listed your mother's Richmond Hill property an hour ago. I froze. Cash only. Quick close. It is priced 30% under market value. Mom gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. That house was her life. It was where she raised us. Kara was selling it for scrap parts before the body was even cold. Do you want me to call the police? Marcus asked. I looked at Mom. Her shock was hardening into something colder, something like steel. No, I said, staring at the blueprint of Kara's destruction. If we called the police now, it was a civil dispute. If we waited until she accepted the check, it was a felony. Let the listing stand, I told him. She is betting on a quick demolition. I am planning a controlled implosion. Thursday morning brought a sky the color of bruised slate. I parked my rental van around the block from the Eternal Rest funeral home. The disguise was simple. A green apron and a large spray of white lilies. No one questions the delivery staff. We are part of the background furniture of grief. I adjusted the hidden camera pinned to my collar. It was a high-definition endoscope lens I usually used for inspecting HVAC ducts. Today, it was inspecting a different kind of rot. I walked to the service entrance. The service hallway smelled of formaldehyde and cheap coffee. A distracted intern buzzed me in without looking up from his phone. Chapel B, he mumbled, waving a hand vaguely down the corridor. Just leave them by the podium. I nodded, keeping my head down. My heart hammered against my ribs, a chaotic rhythm I couldn't regulate. I navigated the corridors like I was reading a floor plan. I knew where the load-bearing columns were, and more importantly, where the acoustics were best. I needed to find Kara before she found me. I heard her voice before I saw her. It was sharp, cutting through the heavy silence of the viewing room. I said, closed casket, Mr. Henderson. I peeked through the crack in the double doors. Kara was standing by the mahogany podium, pointing a manicured finger at the funeral director. My mother was disfigured in the accident. I want to remember her as she was. It was a lie built on a lie. She couldn't risk an open casket, because it was filled with nothing but garden mulch. I pressed the record button on my phone, sensing it with the collar cam. Of course, Miss Harrison. The director soothed, wiping his forehead with a handkerchief. We have sealed the unit as requested. No one will see the interior. Kara relaxed, her shoulders dropping an inch. Good. The investors, the mourners, will be arriving early tomorrow. Everything must be perfect. She wasn't planning a memorial. She was staging a product launch. The casket was just a prop for her performance. I waited for them to move toward the flower arrangements. Moving quickly, I slipped inside the chapel. I placed the vase of lilies on the altar, right next to the microphone stand. Tucked inside the foliage was a small wireless transmitter, the size of a quarter. It was designed to pick up whispers in a concrete vault. It would catch every word of her eulogy, and more importantly, my interruption. I turned to leave, satisfied with the trap, but the heavy brass door handle turned. I ducked behind a velvet curtain, just as the door swung open. It wasn't Kara, it was Dr. Aris. He looked pale, sweating despite the chill in the room. He was checking his watch, pacing nervously near the empty casket. I stepped out, shedding the invisible florist persona. "Dr. Aris," I said, my voice low and clinical. He jumped, nearly tripping over the beer. "You," he stammered, his eyes darting to the exit. "I thought you were banned." "I am just inspecting the structural integrity of your story," I said, stepping closer. I didn't mention the murder plot. I hit him where it hurt. "I noticed the facility's fire suppression system is outdated. It would be a shame if an inspector found irregularities in your medical licensing too." He turned the color of ash. I walked past him, dropping a single lily at his feet. "Fix the cracks, doctor. The roof is coming down tomorrow." Thursday night was a vigil for the living. The kitchen table was covered in legal documents, but the real preparation was happening in the hallway mirror. Mom held up her favorite suit. A striking crimson wool that looked like spilled wine against the beige walls. "It is too loud, Lily," she murmured, smoothing the fabric. "Dead women should wear pastels." I took the hanger from her. "You aren't dead, Mom. You are the fire that burns the house down." She looked at her reflection, seeing the survivor. She sat on the edge of the sofa, the suit resting on her knees. The silence stretched, heavy and suffocating. "Did I build her wrong?" she asked, her voice cracking. "Kara, did I miss a strut? Did I pour the foundation on sand?" It was the question that had been haunting her since the willows. I sat beside her, looking at the cracks in the ceiling plaster. "Some soil is just bad, Mom. You can pour the best concrete in the world, but if the ground shifts, the walls split." I pulled up the floor plans of the funeral home on my tablet to distract her. "We treat this like a site inspection," I said, pointing to the exits. "We identify the hazard, we isolate it, and we remediate." Mom traced the lines of the room where her empty casket would sit. Her fingers stopped at the podium. "I don't want to remediate, Lily," she whispered, her eyes hardening into flint. "I want to condemn the property." It was the first time she sounded like herself in years. My phone buzzed on the coffee table. It was a secure text from Marcus. "Asset in place. Law enforcement on standby. Signal is green." I showed the screen to Mom. The digital glow illuminated the deep lines of worry on her face, softening them slightly. We weren't just two women in a kitchen anymore. We were a demolition crew with a permit. "The police will wait for your signal," I told her. "They need the fraud to be public. They need her to sell the lie." A chime from my personal phone broke the mood. It was a notification from Kara. "Sent you a gift." I opened the message. It was a digital voucher for a spa day, valid only for tomorrow. "Thinking of you. The text read, "Take some time for yourself. You don't need to see the body." I laughed, a dry, humorless sound. She was trying to bribe me into absence with a facial and a massage. She was terrifyingly confident that I was just a grieving, pliable sister. Mom took the phone from my hand and read the message. Her jaw set tight, the muscles working. "She thinks you are weak," Mom said, handing the device back. "She thinks you are just structural support, there to hold things up but never to be seen." She stood up, clutching the crimson suit to her chest like a shield. "She forgot that you are the one who inspects the ruins." The fear was gone now, replaced by a cold, burning necessity. We were done hiding. We didn't sleep that night. The darkness felt like a waiting room. I spent the hours reviewing the video files from the nursing home, ensuring the audio was crisp. Mom sat by the window, watching the streetlights flicker, rehearsing her lines for the morning. The city outside was asleep, unaware that a bomb was set to go off in Richmond Hill at 10 o'clock sharp. I checked the time. Dawn was breaking. The demolition permit was stamped. It was time to bring the house down. The funeral home chapel was cold, but not from the air conditioning. It was the chill of a business transaction taking place. I stood in the back, concealed by the heavy velvet drapes, watching the room fill up. These weren't friends or family, they were potential investors for Harrison Heights. Men in sharp suits checked their watches, while women in designer black typed furiously on silent phones. Kara had turned our mother's memorial into a networking mixer. She stood at the front, a perfect statue of grief, but I saw the tension in her jaw. She was terrified. Kara stepped to the podium, wiping a non-existent tear from her cheek. The room quieted, the hum of business deals fading into respectful silence. My mother, Helen, was a pillar of stability. She began, her voice trembling with practiced precision. She wanted her legacy to build the future. That is why, in her final days, she entrusted the estate to me. It was a script written for the bank officers in the second row. She rested her hand on the polished mahogany casket. She was literally leaning on her crime for support. It was time to pull the rug out. I stepped out from the shadows, my boots striking the marble floor with a heavy, deliberate rhythm. "That is a beautiful speech, Kara," I said. My voice, honed by years of shouting over jackhammers and pile drivers, cut through the room like a diamond saw. "It is a shame it is structurally unsound." The crowd turned as one organism, necks craning to see the intruder. Kara froze, her hand gripping the edge of the podium until her knuckles turned white. "Lily," she hissed, her mask slipping for a fraction of a second. "You are clearly hysterical with grief." "I am not grieving, Kara," I replied, walking down the center aisle. "I am auditing." I saw the unease ripple through the investors. They smell risk like sharks smell blood, and I was bleeding heavily into the water. "This woman needs help," Kara shouted, gesturing to the security guards near the exit. "She is mentally unstable. Please, remove her." Two large men stepped forward, but I held up my phone. I didn't look at them. I looked directly at the loan officer from the bank. "I have a video I think you would find very interesting." I pressed the button on my screen, syncing it to the Bluetooth speakers I had hidden in the floral arrangements yesterday. Kara's voice boomed through the chapel, distorted but unmistakable. "Just sign the papers, Mom. You are going to die anyway. Do it, or I leave you here to rot. The gasps from the pews were genuine this time. Kara looked around wildly, the color draining from her face.
That is a deepfake,
she screamed, her voice cracking. She manipulated the audio? She is jealous of my success! She was flailing, drowning in her own lies. If I am lying, I said, reaching the front of the room. Then why is the casket closed, Kara? I stood just feet away from her now. The smell of her expensive perfume was suffocating, masking the scent of the lilies. Mom wanted it closed. Kara stammered, stepping between me and the mahogany box. She fell. It was traumatic. I looked at the investors, then back at my sister. You mean it was convenient? I reached for the heavy brass latch. The security guards were running now, but they were too late. I shoved the heavy lid upward. It swung open on silent hinges, revealing the truth to the entire room. There was no white satin, no grieving pillow, and certainly no body. The casket was filled with bags of cedar mulch to give it weight. A collective shout went up from the crowd. Flashbulbs went off as reporters, who had been invited to cover the launch, sensed the real story. Kara stood paralyzed, staring into the wooden box that contained nothing but the physical manifestation of her bankruptcy. Where is she? A man in the front row demanded, standing up. It was Mr. Henderson, the notary she had duped. Kara's mouth opened and closed like a fish on a hook. It is a prank, she whispered, looking at her husband, who was already backing away toward the exit. Lily is sick. She stole the body. I laughed, a sharp sound that echoed off the vaulted ceiling. I didn't steal anything, Kara. I just conducted a rescue operation. I turned and pointed a steady finger toward the open chapel doors. If Mom is dead, I announced, my voice filling the stunned silence. Then who is that? Through the open double doors, the bright sunlight pierced the gloom. A sleek black SUV pulled up to the curb, right where the hearse should have been. The rear door opened slowly. A cane emerged first, followed by a flash of crimson wool. The crowd held its breath. Kara grabbed the podium, her fingernails digging into the wood. The structure she had built wasn't just cracking anymore. It was free, falling into the dust. Mom walked up the aisle with a gait that defied her medical chart. The cane was just a prop, her spine was steel. The crimson suit blazed like a signal flare in the sea of mournful black. Guests scrambled backward, knocking over chairs in their haste to escape the impossible. Kara stood frozen at the podium, her mouth shaping a silent scream. Mom didn't look at the crowd. Her eyes were locked on her daughter. She stopped at the first row, breathless but upright. The silence was absolute, heavy with judgment. She reached for the microphone Kara had abandoned. The feedback whine pierced the air, making the bankers wince. I apologize for the disruption, Mom said, her voice clear and amplified. But I found the seating arrangements in that box rather cramped. A nervous titter ran through the room, quickly stifled. Kara lunged forward, grabbing the edge of the podium. She is confused, Kara shrieked, her composure shattering into jagged shards. That is not my mother. My mother died on Tuesday. This is a sick actor hired by my jealous sister? The investors looked from the woman in the box to the woman at the mic. The resemblance was undeniable, but Kara was committed to the lie. She reached out to grab Mom's arm, her fingers hooked like talons. I stepped in between them, catching Kara's wrist. "Don't," I said softly. My grip was iron. "You have done enough damage to this family." Kara struggled, her eyes wild and wet. "You planned this," she hissed at me. "You ruined everything." "I was going to save the estate." Mom pulled her arm free and turned to the stunned crowd. She looked directly at the man from the bank. "My daughter is right about one thing," Mom declared, her voice dropping to a dangerous register. She was trying to save something, but it wasn't the estate. It was her own solvency. She pointed a shaking finger at the mulch-filled casket. "I am not dead, but her credit rating is. She is bankrupt." The murmurs turned into angry shouts. The investors began to surge toward the exits. The heavy oak doors at the back swung open again, but this time it wasn't family. 4 officers from the Financial Crimes Unit marched in, badges glinting under the chapel lights. Marcus had timed the call perfectly. They didn't need to ask who was in charge. Kara backed away, bumping into the floral arrangement I had bugged. "Miss Harrison," the lead detective said, stepping over a fallen wreath. "We have a warrant for your arrest regarding wire fraud, identity theft, and elder abuse." The handcuffs clicked, a sound colder than the grave. Dr. Aries tried to use the confusion to slip out the side exit. He was halfway to the vestry door when I pointed him out. "Officer," I called out, my voice cutting through Kara's sobbing. The doctor prescribed the sedatives that made this fraud possible. Aries froze, his hand on the knob. He looked at me with hatred. But I just stared back. I had inspected his work and found it negligent. 2 officers intercepted him. He slumped against the wall, his medical career ending in zip ties. Kara's husband, Mike, was trying to blend into the wallpaper near the choir loft. He had signed the loan documents too. I had seen his signature on the files Marcus pulled. "Mike!" Kara screamed as officers led her down the aisle. "Call the lawyer." He didn't look at her. He looked at the floor, then turned his back. He walked toward the detectives with his hands raised. He knew the building was coming down, and he wasn't going to be buried in the rubble. As they dragged Kara past me, she dug her heels into the carpet. The expensive heels snapped. "Lily, please," she begged, tears streaking her mascara into black war paint. "I did it for us. I did it to keep the name alive. Tell them it was a mistake. We are sisters." I looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time in years. I saw the fear. But I also saw the calculation. She was still looking for a loophole, a loose brick she could pry out to escape. "We aren't sisters anymore, Kara," I said, my voice void of emotion. "We are just 2 people who lived in the same house." I leaned in close, so only she could hear the final inspection report. "You didn't build a legacy. You dug a hole and tried to throw Mom in it to fill the gap." She wailed, a primal sound of defeat, as the doors swallowed her. The flashing lights outside painted the stained glass windows in chaotic bursts of red and blue. The structural failure was total. The chapel emptied quickly. The investors fled the toxicity of the scandal, leaving behind only the scent of lilies and betrayal. Mom stood alone by the empty casket, her hand resting on the velvet lining. She looked small again, the adrenaline fading into exhaustion. I walked over and took her arm. "It is over, Mom," I said. She looked at the mulch inside the box. "No, Lily," she whispered, picking up a handful of the cedar mulch. The demolition is over. Now we have to clear the debris. The afternoon sun hit the porch, warming the fresh lumber in my hands. It had been 30 days since the funeral that wasn't, and the silence here was finally peaceful. I knelt on the decking, driving a galvanized screw into the new support beam. The old wood had been eaten away by termites and neglect, hidden under cheap paint. It reminded me of Kara's business strategy. I wiped sawdust from my jeans and tested the board with my weight. It held firm. The rot was gone. The screen door creaked, and Mom stepped out carrying a tray with 2 glasses of iced tea. She wasn't wearing the crimson suit anymore, just comfortable gardening clothes and a sun hat. The estate wasn't sold. We had pulled it off the market immediately, paying off the small liens with my savings. It was a stretch, but the house was still ours. She set the tray down on the railing. Her hands were steady now. The tremors from the sedatives had finally faded into memory. You always liked fixing things more than talking to people, Mom said, handing me a glass. The condensation felt cold against my sawdust-covered palm. I took a sip, bracing myself for the criticism I had heard my whole life. I was the clinical one, the robot, the daughter who preferred blueprints to hugs. I know, Mom, I replied, wiping my forehead. I am not warm like Kara was. Mom looked out at the garden. Kara wasn't warm, Lily. She was just flammable. Mom sat on the newly installed swing, testing its motion. I used to worry about you, she admitted, looking at me with a clarity that pierced my chest. I thought you were too focused on the bolts and beams. I thought you missed the beauty of the house. She smiled, a genuine expression that reached her eyes. But when the roof fell in, you were the only one who knew how to hold it up. Your coldness didn't freeze me out, Lily. It preserved me. I sat down beside her, the drill heavy in my lap. The validation settled in me, like a foundation curing in the sun. I wasn't broken. I was just built for heavy loads. We have a lot of legal fees, I mentioned, looking at the pile of mail on the table. Kara's mess would take years to fully untangle. Mom picked up a flyer from a senior center. I was thinking, she said. There are other wolves out there. Maybe we should start hunting. She slid a handwritten index card toward me. It read Harrison & Harrison, Estate Integrity Consultants. I laughed, the sound surprising me with its lightness. I inspect the structure, I said, tapping the card. And you spot the liars. Mom nodded, sipping her tea, as the sun dipped below the tree line. The house was old, and the family was smaller. But for the first time in years, the foundation was solid. We sat in silence, watching the shadows lengthen, ready to build something new.